Consumers want to know the facts about the products they buy, but America's agricultural landscape is not easy to navigate. Between different companies, scientific advancement, government regulations, advertisement campaigns, and an unhealthy amount of myth and misconception, anyone would be hard-pressed to make sense of it. That's where Real Ag comes in. From the producers who make your food, to the store where you buy the final product, and everything in between. This is Real Ag. Now, here's your host, Kyle Bauer.
The Kansas Department of Agriculture, KDA, is the nation's first state department of agriculture. The agency is devoted to the total support of agriculture in Kansas. The department works for the entire agriculture sector, including farmers, ranchers, and agribusinesses. But did you know they also regulate weights and measures, as well as restaurant inspections? We'll learn more about these special areas on this edition of Real Ag.
Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from
the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.
What does the KDA Food Safety and Lodging do?
We inspect and regulate restaurants and other food establishments like grocery stores and convenience stores, as well as food processors, lodging establishments, and egg sales in the state of Kansas. We have a risk-based inspection model, and we inspect high risk once every 12 months, medium risk once every 15 months, and low risk once every 18 months.
What is considered high risk, medium, or low risk?
So it's based on kind of what types of food products are handled and how extensively they're handled. So a high risk is the majority of our licensed restaurants, which there are about 15,000 of those in the state, are in that high risk category, and so typical restaurant type things. The lower risks are packaged foods and foods that maybe don't require temperature control for safety or specialized processing. Well, we have a variety of educational materials. We have a booklet, Focus on Food Safety book, that kind of condenses the food establishment requirements down. They can, of course, look at the food code, especially if they're having trouble sleeping at night, then they can read that and they'll be out in no time. But hopefully they'll stay awake, and we do try to boil that down with the educational materials and handout sheets.
What standards are used when making inspections?
Well, we regulate food establishments, which are sales direct to the end consumer, using the 2012 Kansas Food Code, which is based on the model food code that the US FDA puts out. The model food code is updated once every 4 years with a supplement that's added every 2 years. And we update ours as changes are significant that need to be incorporated. So we kind of have some control over when that comes off. We haven't, again, updated ours since 2012. We participate in this process nationally to bring together all the best science and the best minds across the country on this topic, and we get to contribute that, and then the FDA finalizes that, and then at the state level we have the ability to adopt any provisions that we want to. One of the things that the market needs is confidence in the product, and so we work to help folks ensure safety from farm to fork, because I think that's critical to success. And of course, these food businesses particularly can employ a lot of people in all areas of the state.
What kinds of violations are common?
There's all kinds of violations, and some examples. It goes from employee hygiene and health issues to food temperatures, food source issues, sanitation and cleanliness and maintenance of facilities, and even record keeping requirements. The violations are actually grouped as well into 3 categories. So the highest, the most important violations, those are the ones that are most directly linked to foodborne illness. And then there's ones that support those higher level violations, and then there's the lowest, kind of the baseline that you operate from to operate a safe facility. And so we determine if follow-up or enforcement action is needed based on the numbers and kinds of violations and whether they're corrected during the inspection. Yeah, all of our inspection reports are available on our website, and they can look those up and see the violations that we found or didn't find. If there weren't any violations, then those inspection reports are on the web also. If they're corrected on site during the inspection, then that's noted in the inspection report. Otherwise, at this point, we don't have our orders on the website. Just the follow-up inspections that would occur. Our inspection reports are published out to the web through a web process, a computer process, and they're all the same. If there's an actual error, we'll do an amended inspection report to correct that error because we want that record to be right for them. If they just don't agree with it, but we feel that it's still correct, then there's always due process if we were to get into an enforcement situation.
What happens if an establishment has a violation?
We try to work with the facility to provide education and compliance assistance and try to get them to correct the problem in the short term as well as to achieve long-term behavior change. And then we'll evaluate basically the overall inspection and again the numbers and types of violations and determine whether a follow-up inspection is needed, and then if there continue to be violations, we'll evaluate enforcement action that we might need to take. Our standard approach is when they reach the threshold for a follow-up inspection is we'll typically give them 10 days to make all the corrections, and then we'll reevaluate at that point. And then if there are repeated violations, then we'll proceed down enforcement action as necessary.
Under what circumstances would a restaurant be closed?
We'll only close a restaurant immediately if there's an imminent health hazard or a licensing issue where they're refusing to obtain their license. But the imminent health hazards would include things like a sewage backup or an illness outbreak, pest infestation, cockroaches and mice and so forth, or lack of hot water, lack of refrigeration equipment. Those kind of things, we'll work with the facility to get those corrected or close if they need to while they fix that issue.
What is a compliance inspection?
Well, all of our inspections, we're assessing their compliance. One of the key things we're looking for is active managerial control. Basically, we want the facility to understand the risks that are involved in their operation and to have active plans to control those risks. But we're evaluating all the conditions that we find and comparing that with the standards and then making a determination on their compliance. And throughout the process, whether it's inspections or our enforcement processes, we integrate educational activities and compliance assistance into those processes. It's with anything, I think we learn things and we'll modify requirements or maybe even add requirements, and sometimes requirements aren't necessary anymore. We'll take those out. So we want to have just the right level of regulatory requirements to maintain safety.
Can a business choose to be inspected before their scheduled visit?
From time to time, we'll do a courtesy inspection if special circumstances arise, but we have a lot of facilities across the state, again, 15,000 approximately restaurants, and we have 49 field staff across the state, so we're pretty busy, and so we do try to assist however we can.
What types of things does weights and measures regulate for agriculture?
Weights and measures is very broad. Any weighing and measuring device, with a very few exceptions, is under our jurisdiction. So from an agriculture standpoint, we get into the scales, and the fuel meters are very common for us. Less common, we deal with the mass flow meters that you'll see at a lot of liquid fertilizer plants, propane meters. We get involved with moisture meters, possibly protein meters if there's a few elevators still doing some proteins for wheat. But any weighing or measurement activity where there is dollars changing hands from that measurement involves weights and measures. We require all weighing and measuring devices to be tested. For the most part, it's on a 1-year annual basis. And we collect those records and have that information here in our office so we can go back and try to problem solve and look for issues. That is the owner's responsibility to make sure that happens. So Kansas is a privatized state in that regards, and they have to hire a licensed service company to come out and test their scale, or check their fertilizer meter, or check their seed hoppers. That's another type of a scale. Fertilizer hoppers also. So any of those measuring devices, even the moisture meter, they have to be checked once a year, but that is the owner's responsibility. And then we provide an audit function where we go out and check some of those devices. We don't check all of them, but we go out and check a sample of them and try to ensure that everybody's in compliance, and look for issues, look for trends that we might need to address something a little more with our education program. We also respond to complaints that way. So we do have, a way for folks to communicate us with a complaint, and then we may go out and inspect a facility based off of that complaint.
How do businesses decide which unit of measure to use for various commodities?
Some commodities, that's defined in our statutes and regulations. Some of it's defined in federal requirements. So, for instance, red meat you have to sell by the pound. That's set by, I think, under USDA actually. Some produce, we have a book that says bananas have to be sold one way, apples have to be sold one way, and there's usually 2 or 3 options. So the owners have some flexibility for that. At the end of the day, for most things, though, to simplify it, if you're going to weigh something on a scale that weighs in pounds, you have to sell it by the pound. If you're going to use a meter that measures in gallons, then you have to sell it by the gallon. You're really not allowed to convert a measurement from gallons to liters.
Are there different rules for individuals and businesses?
No, weights and measures does not really make any exceptions for the size or the type of ownership of a business, so those requirements are across the board. There are some exceptions in our law for types of devices. So for instance, in Kansas, railroad scales do not fall under weights and measures. Another big example that affects most of us is if you live in for sure an urban area where you're on a utility for like water, or if you're on a utility for natural gas, or your electric utility, those do not fall under weights and measures. Some of those are under Department of Commerce or some other entity, and usually do not require a once-a-year inspection. We can monitor it from the standpoint of some fairly easy computer work to say, show us all the meters which have not been tested within the past year, or all the scales. So we can pull up some information that way. The weak link is when a business places a scale or a weighing or measuring device of any kind into service, where they start using that for the first time. If they do not hire a service company to do that, we don't get notified, and then we don't know about them, that they're being used. So that's one of, when we're out doing our inspections as a state, we're looking for devices, say, hey, we see you have this scale here on your countertop, we don't have any record of it, then we try to figure that out. And at that point, to bring them into compliance, they have to go ahead and get it tested, and then they're in our system at that point, and we can monitor that. Some of the regulations change over time, and so some scales will be grandfathered under the old regulations, but there is no maximum lifespan for a scale or a weighing and measuring device. As long as they can ensure that they're accurate, that they're in compliance with all the applicable regulations and statutes, that they can continue to use them. So especially with your more expensive devices like your truck scales, you will see a lot of those around that are 30, 40, 50 years old. And they can be a little bit more of a challenge sometimes for us, because again, those parts aren't out there. They have to have parts custom made sometimes. That's one reason we do the annual testing, because every scale, every device, no matter how well they're made, no matter how well they're maintained, can have problems arise. Temperature affects a scale. A lot of folks don't realize that. So your heat and cold, expansion, contraction over time can make that scale become out of tolerance. Wind, that's something with truck scales, especially in Kansas, the western 2/3 of Kansas for sure. The wind can play a major role in that truck scale and the accuracy of it, and they need to try and account for that. Again, it's not a perfect world, but sometimes it may even involve trying to put in a windbreak or a windscreen or a block or something to help ensure that wind isn't affecting the scale.
Are there fines for non-compliance?
What we do is we issue what's called a notice of non-compliance. That's just our formal paperwork saying, hey, you have an issue of some kind. It may be an accuracy issue with the scale. It may be what we call customer position. It may be located in an area where the customer can't see the scale, which is not allowed. The customer has the right to observe the weighing transaction and to see the indications of that weighing transaction. So there's a lot of things that a scale could be issued a notice of non-compliance for. And so normally what we do, if it's a non-accuracy issue, we'll give them 30 days to fix that. If it's an accuracy issue, depending on the error in that device, we may give them 10 days to fix it and still use it if it's a small error. If it's a larger error, which we define as 2 times the allowed tolerance, we will take that device out of service, and they're not allowed to use it until they fix it. So normally that's our first step. Now, what we'll do then on the accuracy is we go back after they tell us they fixed it, and we will test it again to make sure they did indeed fix it. So if we go back after the second time, we could begin assessing civil penalties, which are monetary fines. Normally what we do is there's an in-between step where we will issue some other legal paperwork, kind of escalating the compliance a little bit, but still there's no monetary penalty. We're not talking any criminal penalty, but it does get their attention. And what that does, it also sends a letter to the corporation office. So if we're dealing with a local location with a local manager, sometimes they may not share that with their own hierarchy within their corporation, but once we issue formal legal paper, it goes higher up in the corporation, so more eyes, more attention is paid to that. And normally, things get resolved at that level if they haven't been before. And then if things proceed from there, we have the option of the civil penalty. We have the option of condemning a device if it's not accurate, so we can actually take possession of it or require them to destroy that device. That is kind of a last resort to do that. The law says they have 30 days to fix any deficiency. It's the most we can grant them in the law, except I can, on a case-by-case basis, grant them additional time. You're talking some infrastructure change. You're talking maybe pouring cement. You're talking maybe getting a new device ordered or some parts, and sometimes the parts take a while to get for some of the older machines. We can work with them and say, all right, we'll give you 2 months or 3 months to fix this device. We can also work sometimes grain elevators, due to how they're situated and the piece of land that they're sitting on. They don't have enough adequate room for the approaches for the trucks to drive in and out and for the approaches to meet the requirements. So we can make some exceptions there if we feel it does not affect the accuracy of the skill. The most important thing is accuracy, but some of the other things are to help ensure the customers can help us, keep everybody honest. Part of the other issues that we look at are to ensure that device stays accurate for an entire year. And so you could have a truck skill where the approaches have a lot of potholes, they're steep, the trucks driving up on that scale are bouncing. That scale will probably be out of tolerance within a couple of months. So therefore we say the approaches have to be smooth, they have to be flat at the very end, close to the scale. And there's lots and lots of things like that we look at that sometimes folks don't understand the importance of those things, but those are all designed to help that scale, ensure that scale stays accurate for the whole year. Almost everything we do is unannounced, so we try to show up so nobody has an opportunity. If somebody's intentionally committing fraud, they would have the ability to cover that up if we announce our visits. There are a few situations where we will announce that we're coming ahead of time. There are some things that are such a huge inconvenience to the business that if we don't do that, we're probably wasting our time and we're wasting their time, because it may take 2 or 3 hours to be ready to perform a test. But with very few exceptions, though, we do not announce that we're showing up. And if we have any reason to think that there's something suspicious going on, even in the cases where we might announce, we won't in those situations if we're really doing more of an investigative complaint follow-up.
Who checks the weights used by state inspectors?
Our state inspectors attend the same continuing education classes that the private service companies attend and pass the same tests that they pass. But again, we want to try to ensure that we're the final authority on a lot of this. We want to ensure that we're as good as and hopefully better than a lot of the private companies. One thing we do is there is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They kind of set a lot of the guidelines for weights and measures across the United States, and they maintain the official measurement standards for the United States. So we try to follow a lot of their guidelines, so we adopt some of their handbooks as law, and some of them we don't adopt as law, but we still try to follow as close as we can. And they do offer education classes that we try to send our inspectors to whenever it's possible to do so. And another thing we have started here in the last 2 years in Kansas is the National Conference on Weights and Measures has certification exams that they offer. And so all of our inspectors have passed at least one certification exam, and most of them have passed 2 now in the last 2 years. We value professional development and training because things change fast in this industry. A lot of folks think a scale is this device that you can see in front of you. And in the old days, that's what it was. And there's still a lot of those out there. But today, you have the piece of the scale that you're sitting the product on. Somewhere else, you have the piece of the scale that has the display. Somewhere else, you have part of the system that's calculating the final price. So, and you see that in a grocery store. There's 3 pieces of equipment there that most people take for granted and don't realize there's 3 things happening when you weigh your apples or weigh your bananas or weigh that piece of meat you had the guy cut off special for you. And so there's all those things work together. So we're checking the whole system, not just the piece that you're sitting the product on.
If someone is opening a business, how do they find out, if any, weights and measures regulations will affect them?
The best thing to do is, if they really have questions, is to contact the divisions of weights and measures with the Department of Agriculture. And we do have a website with quite a bit of information where the statutes are posted, so it's easy to go through those, but that's a fairly long process if you want to read them all. But we do have a couple of informational sheets or flyers available on the website as well. But if there's any questions or uncertainties, the best thing to do is probably call or email us, and we'll try to respond to that and give you some good information. So the main thing is to hire that private licensed service company. If they do that, they've probably done their part.
How are reports made by consumers if they feel that they have been overcharged?
Again, they can call our office, they can go on our website, and there's actually a complaint form for Kansas Department of Agriculture. And on there, there's a menu, and you'll just select weights and measures, or you'll select fuel, and that will be routed to us. Because that's one thing we do enforce is pricing accuracy. We do not regulate how much somebody can charge for anything. We don't set prices, but we do go in and ensure that the advertised price for a product matches the price at the cash register. So we go in and do price verification inspections where we will pull 100 items off the shelf and we'll check and make sure that they ring up correctly. And we'll do that in clothing stores, grocery stores, auto parts stores, farm supply stores. So we do that at a wide range of businesses. And it's a pretty tough standard. We require a 98% success rate to pass that test.
When I buy a package of meat in a supermarket, do I pay for the plastic tray and the wrappings?
Businesses are not allowed to sell something by a unit of measurement, so by weight or volume, and include the packaging in that. That is not allowed. So if you're at the salad bar and you're paying by the pound, the plastic container that you're putting that salad in, they cannot include that weight as part of the weight for the transaction. Now, we call that tear checks, so they cannot charge you for the tear weight. Another common, like at the yogurt shops, which are fairly common nowadays, the little cup that's in, they cannot charge you for the weight of that cup. And you have to be very vigilant as a consumer to catch that at the checkout to make sure they're not that they are deducting the tear from the weight. Now, it is possible that they could say, we're going to charge you a packaging fee, or we're going to charge you a handling charge, or we're going to charge you 5 cents for the cup or the container. They can do that, but they can't say, well, the container weighed a third of a pound and it's part of the price of the product. That is not allowed. Most of what consumers will see is if it's a barcode reader, it's programmed into the software of the business that, this product has a tenth of a pound tear that automatically subtracts. If you're at a grocery store at the checkout counter, you can observe that because the scale will be showing you the gross weight somewhere on the screen. But then the printout where it's showing your charges, it will show you the net weight. If the net weight equals the gross weight, they did not take a tear. And then you have the right as the customer to say, oops, stop, I'm not paying for that package. You need to take tear on this. And it would be good if consumers did that because there are a lot of tear issues out there that they need to be aware of.
Weights and measures responsibilities have expanded beyond simple scales and meters. Today's weights and measures officials are responsible for regulating a fast-moving marketplace and the food and safety of lodging inspections as well. And they're vital for public safety. So next time you're in a grocery store or out to eat at your favorite restaurant, please keep in mind the efforts of the KDA to protect you, the consumer. We hope you've learned more about inspections and weights and measures on this episode of Real Ag. Remember, you can see every program of this series by going to smokyhillstv.org. On behalf of the Real Ag crew, I'm Kyle Bauer, and this has been Real Ag.
Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from
the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.